Silent Hill, Resident Evil, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, the piano room in Mario 64. These are some of gaming's most terrifying entries, but they all pale in comparison to the absolute heart attack that is Enemy Zero. A game where you are forced to deal with invisible enemies inside a cramped, maze-like, derelict spaceship with only an anxiety-inducing chime to help you pinpoint where they are, and a weapon that you need to wait to charge before it can be fired. It's a one-hit kill if you can pull it off, but the alien monsters need to be right in front of you for it to work. And if you miss, you're dead. Enemy Zero is a first-person sci-fi survival horror game developed by Warp and released for the Sega Saturn in 1996 in Japan. And according to Wikipedia, there was a Windows port in '98, which I never knew about. It was created by none other than Kenji Eno, the creative mastermind behind the FMV adventure game D, and its sequel, the third-person, first-person action RPG shooter hunting sim. My mom's mind is inside the body of an AI machine that I need to shoot in the vagina. D2. And I've covered both of these games on the channel. Links in the description if you want to watch them. Enemy Zero was originally meant to be released on the PlayStation, but as I mentioned in the D review, Eno had developed an extremely antagonistic relationship with Sony during the release of D. Essentially, Eno wanted a certain number of copies of D pressed for the PlayStation. Sony refused, thinking that the game wouldn't be much of a success. But when they couldn't fill all of the pre-orders that came in before the game's release, Eno found out that Sony had pressed even less copies than the paltry amount they had even settled on. This all led to a dramatic press conference held by Sony, where Eno announced that his next game, Enemy Zero, would be developed and released exclusively for the Saturn. The man was not afraid to burn a few bridges. Upon release, critical response to Enemy Zero was heavily divided, with many critics praising the design and atmosphere, but criticizing the combat for being much too difficult and unforgiving. Despite the reviews, and despite the fact that by the tail end of '97, when the game was released in the West, support for the Saturn was quickly declining, Enemy Zero proved to be somewhat of a success, further cementing Eno's reputation as an auteur in the gaming world. In Enemy Zero, you take the role of Lara. No, not Laura Harris from D, or Laura Parton from D2, but Lara Lewis. Eno had this idea for the character of Lara to be a digital actress, so a blonde woman named Lara appears in all three of these very loosely connected D trilogy games. And when I say loosely connected, I mean the only real connections are a main character named Lara and some other named characters who are completely different people when they show up in D2. Anyway, this Lara is awakened from a cold sleep on board a biological research vessel currently floating through space by an emergency alarm going off. Something has broken loose from containment and is now running amok through the hallways. Lara tries to contact one of her crewmates, Parker, but upon answering the video call, she witnesses his brutal death at the hands of an invisible enemy. Lara then steps out from her own room to assess the situation and see what can be done about these unseen creatures that are running rampant on the ship. And I really want to play a bit of this opening movie for you so you can get a sense of just how 90s this game is. I love how her banging on the video monitor is in sync with the beat, and the other part where she lifts her head up too. I'm just so amazed. It's beautiful. The presentation in Enemy Zero is pretty utilitarian for the most part. The hallways are metallic and dimly lit, save for a late game area overgrown with plants, but there are some unique features, such as flickering lights, and some of the rooms have decent details, like various machinery or boxes scattered about, which points to a lot of manual labor on the ship. This puts the setting more in line with the Nostromo in Alien. You can imagine a lot of maintenance being done, not just scientists conducting experiments. Crew compartments and storage rooms are explored explored in an FMV adventure game style, and these areas have a good amount of detail for a Saturn title. I like the futuristic design of a lot of the gadgets and objects in these rooms. The cinematography and the CG cutscenes are all really well done. As I've mentioned before in previous reviews, Eno really has an eye for film, so all of these are well directed. The character models are all pretty simplistic, but the designs are well done. Everyone looks distinct, and the voice acting is good enough for some characters, like Kim.
Girl, I was expecting to wake up and see the clear blue sky of Earth. Hey, you saw it too, right? Well, I guess you really wouldn't say saw. Maybe feel is more like it.
But others are pretty bad, like David here.
I got hit pretty hard from that earlier, Jill. The summer tower is relatively safe for now. Doesn't look like I'll be too mobile with these injuries. Could you maybe arrange it so you'll be able to head over this way?
I've also got a sneaking suspicion that these accents aren't performed by actors of the same ethnicity.
The file on David? I don't know anything. I'm only... Look, don't you know it was rude looking into someone else's things without permission?
Also, according to the game's North American box art, Jill Conniff of the band Luscious Jackson performs the voice of Laura Lewis.
Through this secret file, I have come to understand that this craft is returning to Earth from a planet called XGIL. The mission of the voyage was the abduction of the savage predators which inhabit planet XGIL and their transportation back to Earth.
So, yeah, voice acting, meh. But the gameplay sounds are really where things come alive. The ship and various technology on it hum ominously as you wander around and interact with things, leaving you with a terrible sense of foreboding. And that sense will be confirmed once your Vex Positioning System, or VPS for short, starts going off. This chiming tracker indicates the presence of other life forms and tells you when you're not alone. This sound, along with the screeching of your enemies when they get close to you, is really what makes this game so terrifying. And you'll start having nightmares of this chime if you play Enemy Zero long enough, I guarantee it. These are the moments when your heartbeat will really start to skyrocket. But I'll go more in depth about this mechanic in the next section. Most of the game is filled with the ambience of the ship, but there are a few musical numbers. These were composed by Michael Nyman, who has written some operas and also composed a few film soundtracks. According to Eno, he had a meeting with Nyman and it took over 6 hours to convince him, but Eno got him to agree to compose the score for the game. The tracks stay mostly subdued with light piano pieces when you find items, and some orchestrated moments during character interactions. Things pick up a bit more toward the end, though, and there is, of course, that absolute banger in the opening cutscene. The most interesting part of Enemy Zero's gameplay is its heavy reliance on sound. Eno would toy with this mechanic even more in his next game, Real Sound: Winds of Regret, a game he actually made for blind players, which is a strange specimen that would be cool to cover if it weren't for the fact that it's basically an audio drama that's completely in Japanese.
あんなとこ登れるのかな。役場のおじさんが掃除してるとこ見たことあるの。中に階段とかあるし、絶対登れるよ。うん、じゃあ時計台の前に7時に待ち合わせしよう。うん、ちゃんと忘れないで来てね。忘れないよ。絶対よ。絶対行くって。どうせ明日から。
In Enemy Zero, sound is how you track your enemy, and silence is your best friend. You control Lara from a first-person perspective throughout the entire game. The B button allows you to run. X and Y strafe. Pressing C and using the D-pad allows you to free look. You can cycle through your items with L and R, and interact with A. A also brings up your gun. Like I mentioned before, inside safe rooms, Enemy Zero switches to an adventure game style, where you move from node to node and interact with your surroundings to find key items and complete puzzles. Once you leave the comfort of these smaller rooms though, you'll wander through the hallways of the ship with complete freedom of movement. The ship itself is made up of several towers, each named after a season. You start in Winter Tower, then move to Summer, Fall, and finally Spring. The loneliness and claustrophobia of Enemy Zero seems like a pretty clear nod to Ridley Scott's Alien, and we'll see several more nods and references once we get into the story. The movement and exploration is the simplest part of Enemy Zero's gameplay. The real anxiety comes from your Vex positioning system, which, as the game describes, is a device worn in the ear that detects the presence of other life forms. The VPS emits 3 different tones that go from low to high-pitched, and will begin chiming faster when a life form is near you. A low-pitched tone tells you the enemy is behind you. Medium means they are on either side. High means they're in front of you. Since your enemies are invisible, this is how you detect them throughout the game. And let me tell you, it is pants-shittingly scary wandering through dark hallways, hearing this sound chiming with the pitch rising and the frequency increasing. To those watching, it might just sound annoying, but trust me when I say that playing it is a completely different experience. The monsters can also hear you, so running isn't a good move if you're trying to avoid an enemy. Combat is your only option, and what do we get to fight off these invisible one-hit kill enemies? A shotgun? A flamethrower? Nope. It's this dinky energy pistol. This thing has an extremely short range, a shit battery, and needs to charge before firing. But don't overcharge it, because then its energy will deplete to 0 and you'll have to wait until it charges up again. But usually you're not going to get a chance to charge it up again. This makes combat intense and terrifying. The way an encounter will work is you'll hear a chime from your VPS, indicating that an enemy is in the vicinity, a gameplay mechanic that may have inspired a certain other survival horror game. Then you'll need to wander around until the chime reaches its highest pitch and starts ringing faster. This tells you that an enemy is very close to you. When the enemy is about to attack, it will screech, and a harsh alarm will start ringing. Press the A button and charge your shot just enough so you can fire. Too early and it will do nothing. Too late and you'll have to wait for it to charge again, which will, 9 times out of 10, be too late for you. And the enemy will kill you. So you need to time it just right, so you get enough of a charge, then release the A button to fire your shot. If the enemy is close enough, you'll land a successful shot, and 1 hit will kill it. There is no margin for error. If you hesitate, or get stuck on the environment, or back yourself into a wall, you're done, and it's back to your last save. This makes every encounter just so stressful, and it's bad enough dealing with one enemy. Wait until you get to the rooms with multiple enemies, when you've got multiple chimes going off at the same time, and you don't know which way is up. It's fucking harrowing. The guns also only hold a certain amount of charge and will need to be recharged at charging stations. You'll find different guns throughout the game. Some of them will be able to fire a few shots before the battery depletes, but the one you'll be carrying throughout the beginning of the game can only hold enough charge for a single shot. It is insanely nerve-wracking and frustrating, and I wanted to give up and just go cry in a corner on multiple occasions. But it's that intensity and the uniqueness of the mechanics that had me coming back after taking just a short break. There's a select few who will put up with this kind of torture. Some call us insane, others call us masochistic. Still others refer to us as filthy fucking motherfucking shit eaters. But in our struggle, we are one. Except for the ones who are going to jump into the comments and tell me how this is a baby game for babies and the combat is so easy. Yeah, fuck you. Toward the end of the game, you'll find a gun that doesn't need to be recharged, which is more convenient, but it doesn't make the actual combat any easier. The difficulty can be off the charts, but the design is like nothing else. The game is made up of 4 discs, numbered 0 through 3, because Enemy Zero, right? You get it? Do you get it? You got it? But disc 0 only contains the opening cutscene, a weird little promo video for Warp, and a training mode. Do the training mode. Enemy Zero does nothing to explain how its combat works during the main game, but the training mode eases you into it. Try each level multiple times to get a feel for the timings of the gun and the enemy positioning. Believe me, if you just try to jump in, you're going to be seeing this screen a lot. I mean, you're going to be seeing this screen a lot anyway, but at least you'll have some idea of what you're doing wrong. I mentioned the death sends you back to your last save. Saving is done manually by using a voice recorder, but like your gun, this also runs on batteries. You only get a certain number of saves, so use them wisely. The level design also becomes increasingly more labyrinthine as the game progresses, and there are several areas where you'll be left without a map, and these are usually the most maze-like. But even if there is a map of an area, you can only check it on the computer terminals in certain rooms. So in this modern age, I'd recommend just taking a photo of your screen so you can refer to it at any time. That's what I did, because I'm a big fucking cheater and a baby who plays baby games. But yeah, for some areas, you'll either have to have a good memory or draw your own map. That's really my big complaint with the gameplay. I didn't mind the combat because it's designed to be difficult, and honestly, you get used to it, and it becomes less disorienting the more you play. But wandering around lost is really what grated on me. You can clear out all the enemies in most areas, and they don't respawn. That at least alleviates the threat of death. But walking around through empty corridors, completely lost, just kills the tension. Next, I'll talk about the story. It's pretty straightforward, but there are a couple of twists and one really big one. So if you want to check out Enemy Zero for yourself, skip to this time. If not...
Okay. Let's go.
After leaving her room, Lara's first order of business is to go to the basement of Winter Tower to check on Parker. Inside his quarters, she finds blood spatters on the walls and Parker's decapitated corpse slumped in the corner. She already saw his death on the monitor in her room, so I don't really know what she was expecting to find here. When she returns to the upper floor, she barely misses one of the invisible creatures as it leaves another crewmate's room, this time Marcus. A late night rendezvous, perhaps? Marcus, you devil. Oh, well, Marcus. I'm not about to tell you how to live your life, but protection, buddy. Lara has to use Marcus's detached fingers to access his storage locker and arm herself with his energy gun before heading out again. Ugh, that sound. Is that what dismembered fingers sound like? If you know, leave a comment and enlighten us. Also be sure to like and subscribe. Lara next heads off to find Kimberly, whom she contacted on the video phone, so at least she knows she's still alive. While in the elevator, Lara is attacked by another enemy, and the gun she just got gets knocked out of her hand. Great job, Lara. This is why we can't have nice things. Honestly though, this design decision makes sense. You're given a halfway decent weapon in the beginning to get the hang of combat, possibly even recover from a mistake if your backpedaling skills are good enough. Then we get that gun taken away, and have to deal with a one shot per charge piece of shit that we'll eventually pick up in George's room. Difficult? Yes. A smart design decision for a horror game? I think so. It leaves you vulnerable while not leaving you completely defenseless. Anyway, Lara escapes the elevator with the monster hot on her heels. Upon reaching Kimberly's locked quarters, Kim tells her to climb into the vents above and escape. Yeah, just take your sweet time there, Lara. Come on! We're not out of the woods yet though, as there are more enemies stalking around the ventilation area, and we have nothing to defend ourselves with. The goal is to make it to George's room, but this place is a maze, and the first area we've encountered that we haven't seen a map of. There are also conveyor belts on the floor that only move in one direction, and it's just great. After finding George's room and grabbing his gun, we make another panic trek through the vents to charge the thing, but now we can finally take out the enemies here. We also have to go back and charge it between each encounter, because like I said, it only holds one charge per shot. Fun. We find out in this section that our gun can be used to destroy environmental obstacles too. Don't worry, we'll never use it for this purpose ever again. After finally exiting the vents, Lara meets up with Kim. Much like in D2, she's the character with the most personality. There's a warmth to Kim, and it's about the only feeling of solace you get in this game. In Kim's room, we contact another crew member, David, who is currently located in the Summer Tower. Lara then gets bored or something, I guess, and decides to subject Kim to all the trauma she's already been through by calling Ronnie and Parker.
Ronnie.
Yeah, and check this out. His head got taken clean off. Can you believe that shit?
Oh, please, Parker! Ah!
Yeah, fucking wild, right? Kim reveals that she and Parker were a thing, but later on she tells us that Parker was her husband and that Lara was at the wedding. I guess they missed that little story incongruity during script checks. Or more likely it's a translation error. Lara calls David back while Kim's off crying about her dead husband. They're all like, is she gone? Yeah, cool. Let's talk about how we're still, alive and in love. Man, sure does feel good being alive and all. That Kim and her dead husband, who's not alive. What a loser. Kim returns to the room, and she and Lara resolve to head to Summer Tower to find David and the ship's scientist, George. Kim also enlightens us on how to deal with the enemy.
It's to stare your enemy in the eyes and never, ever look away. Just like taking care of a baby.
Kim, are you killing babies? She tells Lara to wait while she clears a path up ahead. I mean, despite her utter hatred for infants, she's a pretty badass character. Unfortunately, Lara loses contact with Kim just as she encounters an enemy and runs off to investigate. She finds a blood trail and Kim's gun, but no sign of Kim. Still, at least we can toss George's useless gun. Lara's next stop is Ronnie's room, the captain of the ship, whom we saw dead on the video phone earlier. Lara steals his shades, which you'll need shortly, but honestly, when I first saw this, I just laughed. The dude's dead and you're pinching his sunglasses? Like, what the fuck, Lara? But yeah, the password for his computer is written in some kind of special ink that can only be seen wearing sunglasses. And I'm guessing a black light as well, you know? Know what I'm saying? Do you get it? Because it's on Ronnie's computer, Lara finds a file with a log that outlines a mission, with the priority being the safe transport of a life form, which is referred to as enemy. This is the highest priority of the mission, regardless of the crew member's safety. There's also a body scanner in Ronnie's room. This will be important later. Lara next goes to meet with George.
Laura, I was worried about you.
The sincerity is just dripping from your voice, George. He's busy making a key card so they can gain access to the Fall Tower, which is currently locked off. So he tells Lara to go check on David. David and Lara share an awkward reunion. Enough! David goes off to check on the escape pods in the basement. George seems really interested in David and Lara's relationship.
When you have a problem, come directly to me first. There is only one person who understands you, and that is me.
Listen, dude, you've already been friend-zoned. Don't make me cut you off completely. Our next meeting with David is complicated by the fact that he's dead, and it's also revealed that he's part machine. So your boyfriend's an android. Oop. Not dead yet. David didn't know that he was just a machine and is confused by the human emotions that he feels. Join the club, buddy. David finally dies, and Lara yanks the chip from his head and goes back to George for answers. But George is missing, so Lara uses his computer while he's gone to check out David's chip and discovers that his programming was to capture the quote-unquote enemy, which is now referred to as a bioweapon. Just then, an enemy casually waltzes into the room and shoves its tentacle down Lara's throat. Oh, not this again. George busts in and saves Lara and berates her for using his computer.
What did you see? The file on David? I don't know anything. I'm only... Look, don't you know it was rude looking into someone else's things without permission?
Meaning my boyfriend's head? George storms out after his tantrum, and Lara notices he's dropped a key. This key activates the terminal on the body scanner in Ronnie's room. So Lara hops in and discovers that she's got a little buddy hanging out inside of her. Also, her insides don't look quite right. George appears and reveals the Vex Corporation's plan to sell these enemy creatures to the military as biological weapons, and also that both David and Lara were androids that he programmed. That's what he was referring to earlier when he said he was the only one that could understand her. Totally misread that situation. George then attempts to reprogram her, but Lara runs from the room. This part of the game is a little bit directionless. You actually need to find George again, because there's nowhere you can really go without his key. But in the story, you've just run from him, and he's not in Ronnie's room if you try to go back in and check. So I just ran around aimlessly for a bit. What you're supposed to do is go back and check David's room, which why would you ever think to do that? David is dead. But it really just comes down to process of elimination after running all over. George shows up again. He's still hellbent on reprogramming Lara's memory, but his plan is thwarted by one of the enemies. Lara then loots George's still warm corpse and heads off to Fall Tower. On the elevator, the thing living inside her neck starts to wake up. She gets some flashes of memories before the thing decides to go back to sleep. Arriving in Fall Tower, this section is made up of maze-like corridors and we have no map. Also, your gun doesn't have that many charges, and there are no charging stations. So for the first time, we need to conserve energy and try to avoid enemies as much as possible, which is just as nerve-wracking as it sounds. At the bottom of Fall Tower, Lara finds a locker room with David's space helmet. But forget that, we also get his gun, which you can fire as much as you like without having to recharge it. This is good, but combat is still hard, and we'll soon find some enemies we can actually see. These little crawling buggers that like to pop out from around corners. Still a threat, but at least they're visible. We haven't completely dispatched with the invisible enemies yet either. Lara heads to the spring tower next and runs into a giant heart just chilling there. This could possibly be considered the final boss of the game, but it doesn't move, and like most enemies, it only takes one shot to take it out. After that, Kim shows up. She's alive, and she greets Lara by slashing her throat. Luckily, it's only to get rid of the little parasite inside of her neck. Kim reveals that she was in on the mission to capture the enemy creatures, and she also knew that Lara and David were androids. Kim gives Lara David's memory chip and heads off to be with Parker, who's already dead. Oh, and she's activated the ship's self-destruct sequence. Lara takes the scenic route to return to Winter Tower and Parker's room, where she enters just a second too late to stop Kim from taking her own life. I felt like this was kind of a cop-out for her character. She was a tough, independent lady, also the most likable part of the cast, and then she just goes and kills herself to be with her dead husband. The only thing left to do is find the escape pod, but upon entering the final area, the VPS gives out. Piece of shit. However, David's consciousness has accessed the ship's intercom through George's computer, and he gives you verbal instructions on how to find the escape pod. Eventually, Lara reaches the pod and makes her escape just as the ship explodes. Then she takes a much-needed rest. Geez, the only thing missing here is Jonesy. Overall, the plot of Enemy Zero is interesting enough, but fairly predictable. I mean, especially if you've seen the movie Alien. There's a decent attempt made to flesh out some of the characters, especially Kim, Lara, and David. George takes the role of Ash, being in on the whole plot from the beginning, although he's not an android. I don't know, it's a neat little homage, and overall I enjoyed it, even with the hokey dialogue. It's enough to keep you moving forward through the gameplay segments, and the cutscenes are a welcome break from the tension. And even though most of the characters are dead, there is a little bit of a happy ending, as David graces the computer in the escape pod.
Hey, I wonder if it's sunny on Earth today.
I don't know, David, you're in a computer. Check the weather app or something. Enemy Zero really is a masterclass in horror game design. The tension and mechanics are all tuned perfectly to make you feel vulnerable, but not completely helpless. You just need to master the uncompromising combat mechanics. The most interesting thing about Enemy Zero's horror is that it completely forgoes relying on scary visuals to instill fear in the player. Well, not completely. There are still gory character deaths, but I mean more in terms of the gameplay sense. Horror in general relies heavily on visuals just as much as sound to create tension, but outside of a few cutscenes, Enemy Zero's horror is completely aural. It's just the increasingly frantic chiming of the VPS and the occasional screech of a nearby invisible monster. There's nothing inherently scary about any of the locations. It's just the isolation, the vulnerability thanks to the combat mechanics, and the dread that comes when you hear your VPS starting to beep. Is it the scariest horror game? Not really. I think I felt more consistently disturbed while playing something like Silent Hill for the first time. And at least for me, the skill required to wield the guns in Enemy Zero correctly created this drive to get better with them, which negated the fear factor somewhat. It's unrelenting in its difficulty and in its adherence to its design philosophies. And even if you don't like playing the actual game, you really have to respect it for that. However, it can also be incredibly frustrating, and certain sections start to eat away at your dread by leaving you directionless inside of empty mazes. Still, I think it's one of the most interestingly designed horror games out there. It's a different take with its reliance on sound, and there were several sections where my heart was pounding as I frantically swung Lara around while multiple chimes were going off, trying to pinpoint where the closest enemy was so I could land that perfect shot, or running away from nearby enemies because I didn't have a charge in my gun and just had to get the hell out of there. Those moments were great. So now that I've covered the 3 quote-unquote D trilogy games, how do they all rank? Well, I think the first D is an interesting experiment in atmosphere with a goofy but brief story. It's the easiest one to find nowadays since it's available on Steam and GOG. It's also a short game, so I think it's worth at least checking out. D2 is probably the easiest to get into gameplay-wise, with its mix of third-person exploration and first-person combat, but you've really got to be in the mood for watching cutscenes, because that's like half the game, and the story is pretty wacky, but worth experiencing. Enemy Zero, on the other hand, has the tightest design, and is easily the scariest, but is also the most uncompromising and difficult. A curious oddity that's worth checking out, but I feel like few people will actually invest the time to play through completely. It has a lost Windows port, so it would be cool if somebody could come along, get that running on modern systems, and release it on storefronts. But anyway, that's Enemy Zero, and that's all of the Kenji Eno stuff I'm going to cover for a while. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't seen the D or D2 videos, the links are down in the description, so check them out. Before you do that though, please like the video if you're still watching. Also, leave a comment and let me know what you think about Enemy Zero, or if you played it before. I'm interested to hear other people's opinions. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I also have a Twitter with a link in the description, and yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Anyway, thanks for watching. Enemy Zero. Check it out. Dungeon Chill. Out.
僕らもそうでしたけど、それこそ本数をね初めから何万本ってこう決められちゃったりとかね、例えばこの企画はダメだとか言われたりとか、このシーンはカットしろとか、そういうこと結構多かったんですが、最近はちょっと変わってきたらしいんだけど、そういったその危険もね、そのなんていうかな、表現の自由とか、そういったのもその考えた上でもうちょっとね、ソフトウェア側が強くなって、で例えばこのソフトを作ってやるよとかね、っていうぐらいのね立場になれればねいいなと思いますし。